Welcome to another episode of the Best Damn Coach podcast. Today I am joined by Ellen Yin. She's amazing. You guys are going to love her. I'm going to let her tell you guys about who she is in just a moment, but I love to give the backstory to how we met. So first I want to say welcome.
Thank you, Amanda. I'm so thrilled to be here.
Yeah, I had the opportunity to be on your show, and while that was amazing and we had a great conversation, there was something beautiful in the lead up to that I like to tell this story about because I think it speaks a lot to your character and also to the don't give up, keep going if you believe in something. And so, backstory, you guys, I pitched to Ellen's show because I'm very attracted to her content because of her financial transparency, which is a conversation we're really going to have today. I love how she throws it all out there. She shows what's working, what isn't, and in general, that there's high integrity in her content, which I really love. So shout out to you.
Thank you.
And so I was like, I want to be a part of that. And so I sent her this pitch and it totally missed the mark. And it did, we can just be honest with each other. And while I'm actually a listener, not like a BS listener, because I'm
Yeah.
sure you and I get a lot of those. Like, I love your episode about, and then you can tell they actually never really listen to the show.
Totally.
Um, I am a listener. However, the way I formulated the pitch really wasn't in like a case study format. And Ellen and her team could have easily been not acknowledged me, not sent an email back, not said anything. And instead, what she did was gave very constructive feedback on what she was looking for and kind of some tips. And so I could have just quit. And instead, I was like, oh, I belong on her. I'm going to add value to her people. And so I was able to very quickly recraft the pitch, giving specific case study format. And in fact, they loved the pitch in that format. They did say yes. And so I just think it's so awesome that amidst running a business, you didn't just say no, you actually gave specific feedback. I don't know if you do that for everybody. If you do, that's awesome. But I would love for you to share why give specific feedback?
Well, first off, I just got to commend you for your own, tenacity and more than anything, your open-mindedness and collaborative spirit of being willing to accept the feedback and then also take action on it. So kudos to you, Amanda. We don't always have the opportunity to give every single person who pitches us feedback, especially if we can tell it's a mass copy paste like pitch where it really honestly doesn't even deserve the time or attention to craft such a response. But for you in particular, we could tell that you were indeed a listener of the show, that you really cared about providing value to our listeners, and your story and who you are in your business is very compelling. Your skill sets are compelling. But again, like you said, it was just the format needed to be tweaked a little bit. And, sorry, there was something caught in my throat.
No worries. Go for it.
Oh my God. Okay, wait 1 second. Let me take a drink of water.
We can drink the water. By the way, we both are vibing with all of our fall colors, and we had to make sure we reapplied very amazing lipstick for this episode.
No, we should take a little selfie.
We will.
Anyways, so the format of our show, because we're a case study driven show and each episode is really centered on one specific strategy that someone has successfully implemented in their own business, and then the impact of how that's, grown their revenue or their audience or their client list or whatnot, it was really important that first and foremost, we serve our listeners. And so your willingness to come back and say, okay, let's workshop together something that is going to really resonate with the listeners. I appreciated that so much about you. And I think that's really a key lesson for anyone listening, whether you're pitching a show or going after a new client or whatever it is that is stepping outside of your comfort zone. Sometimes when you hear that no, don't be afraid to follow up and say, what would make it a yes? What could we do to make this more appealing for you or your audience or whatnot? Because you never know how that feedback could really, change everything.
Yeah, so excellent. And so, as we're speaking to the show and her financial transparency, let's just give a little leeway and then I'd love for you to tell your story. But Ellen is the founder and host of the Cubicle to CEO podcast. If you haven't listened, haven't heard of it, I definitely encourage you to go listen and put it into your feed on a regular basis. But really, on the show, she shares not only her financial transparency of how she took her basically $300 freelance gig and has created over $2 million in revenue. And she does that in these bite-sized pieces that are highly valuable. And it's really coming from people who not just run multi 8 and 7 figure businesses, but people that are running multi 6 figure businesses too. So you get the whole gamut, which I love. And what I would love for you to just offer the listeners is a very, quick version of how you got to do where you're at today specifically. So whatever parts you want to share, we'd love to hear.
Absolutely. Long story short, I was an accidental entrepreneur who quit my corporate job, my first and only cubicle, hence the name Cubicle to CEO, when I was 23. And at the beginning of 2018, I landed my first freelance social media marketing client. It was a $300 project, but what it instilled in me is the vision that I had transferable, monetizable skills that I could turn into a business and sell outside of a traditional job. And so I decided to run with it and see where it would take me. I thought, if this doesn't work out, I can always go back and apply for more jobs. So there's really nothing to lose here. But 6 years later, here we are, still building this business. And our business has gone through many evolutions. The first phase of my business was building up that boutique social media marketing agency. So we offered done for you marketing services at that time. Then the second phase, which is the one that we kind of just came out of about a year ago, was my online educator phase, where we really doubled down on online courses and coaching programs, helping freelancers scale their own one-on-one services. And then most recently, ever since last summer, we've been operating as a media company. And this is definitely one I think that is most outside my comfort zone, because it really is an industry that I know very little about, and I'm having to learn all of these new terms and these new relationships and offers. And it's a little bit different than the other two, because with clients and with students, I'm selling direct to the end student. Like if I'm selling a course, I'm just selling to you, the student. But with our current business model, our product is actually free to our community members. So the podcast we treat just like we would a paid product. We put a lot of effort and resources into creating the best possible show, but our listeners obviously don't pay to listen to our content. So how we monetize is through brand partnerships and the amazing brands that we work with that sponsor our content and that allow us to continue to do this work. And so it's been interesting because now we kind of serve two different audiences per se. We have our brand clients, and then we have our listeners or our newsletter readers who are our community. So it's been really cool to go through all these different evolutions, but that's the long story short of where we're at today.
So cool. Kudos to you for really being willing to be open to the evolution. And that's really something I heard you, these iterations, I will say, of business. I'd love for you to speak to that. I just, I struggled in making, some changes in my business model over the years, because one of the thoughts I had is, if I evolve, I had this thought, this distortion really, like that means that I am failing, or that thing that like that didn't work, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm
Mhm.
curious if you've ever had that thought or similar thoughts, and how you coached yourself into being okay in evolving anyway.
I'm so glad you brought this up, Amanda, because I think this is a conversation that too few people talk about. And it's the fact that sometimes iteration or drastic change, like completely scrapping your existing offers and trying new ones, has actually nothing to do with the fact that you're not succeeding at what you're currently doing. It's actually the opposite, where you are maybe excelling at what you're doing. Maybe your revenue is consistently growing, or you are gaining momentum for whatever it is that you're known for, but you personally don't feel lit up anymore by what you're offering in your business. And we find ourselves in these traps of golden handcuffs. It's very similar actually to being in like a corporate job
Mhm,
that pays
mhm.
really well, that you're really good at. And you would think to yourself, why would I leave the stability of this to do something completely unknown, like starting a business? The same thing can actually happen in your own business when you're doing something really well and people commend you for your skills in said thing. But again, maybe you don't actually want to be doing that thing anymore. And so that is actually more close to what my story was with both or all three evolutions at this point, with that first transition from done for you agency services to education. We were growing our client portfolio by that point almost completely by word of mouth towards the end, because our services were performing really well. Our clients were staying with us on average a year or longer. We were getting a lot of inbound referrals. But that didn't mean that when I was looking out into the future, that I wanted to build up this giant agency that had, dozens of clients and a staff of 10, 20, 30 people managing all of these accounts. That just didn't fit with the vision of what I wanted. And so I felt really called to mentorship and education. And so that's why I decided to take that first iteration and jump into online courses and coaching. And I loved that journey so much too. And I don't think my heart for mentorship will ever leave. I think some part of me is always there, but I did also again start to feel that pull where it almost felt like I was getting boxed into this identity as a coach. And I knew that the impact of what our business could do, what our platform could do for women in business was so much bigger than just what I alone could offer as a coach or as an educator. So that's why I decided to step out again and create this media platform that's not all centered on me. It's actually really cool sometimes, Amanda, when I meet people at events who don't even realize necessarily that I'm the founder of Cubicle, the CEO, and they have had some sort of value or interaction with our brand outside of me. And when I see that happen, when I see the platform that we're building existing and thriving outside of me and being able to spotlight and support other women entrepreneurs, that fills my heart because I'm like, okay, I know that the legacy of what we're creating can last beyond me. And that feels more aligned with the vision towards what we're going. But it's just a great reminder that just because you change doesn't mean what you're currently doing is something you're failing at.
Yeah, Ellen, I totally relate to that latter piece of, gaining momentum, being at the peak and waking up and finally just giving yourself permission to let it all go
Mhm.
because it just doesn't internally, you know, really align with both your vision, but also the, I don't know, just like the
Yes.
excitement. I just realized when I gave myself permission, I was waking up before my alarm clock again, right?
Mhm.
The things that I felt in that initial part of my business. And so I really had to coach myself on what's my intention here? Is the intention dropping this thing because of more profit? Is my intention dropping this thing because of my own personal happiness? Like, what's the intention? And for those of you listening who might feel the conversation we're having is really hitting home for you, I would just take some time to journal and really explore your intentions behind making a pivot, because I see a lot of people pivoting to try to like go viral, hit the next big, this offer is going to go big, this offer is going to, and really, take some time to sit with the rationale behind that before you decide to scrap it all and turn towards the next thing
Oh,
for sure.
okay. I just want to add a piece to that because that really, really resonates with me about getting clear on why are you making this pivot? Because to your point, Amanda, if my goal with the pivot was to make the most amount of money possible, I never would have pivoted. Like where we were at, where we were at with our education side of the business, like we were finally in that like year 3 of doing that specific business model where a lot of our funnels were getting optimized. Like things were kind of like flowing and growing, right? All we had to do was feed more traffic, pump up our ad spend or do these minor tweaks to really
Totally.
scale. And I chose to pull back and switch to media, not because it would make me more money. In fact, in the name of financial transparency, right? Like I publicly share our business income reports every quarter on the podcast. And if you go and listen to this last year, you'll notice that our revenue has actually dropped significantly since, 2021 or even 2022. And a lot of that has to do with the amount of time it takes to build a solid foundation for the type of business model that we currently operate in. And there's no way if profitability or if revenue growth was a primary factor, then I would have made totally different decisions. So again, it's getting clear on like,
Mhm,
are
mhm.
you okay with taking that that hit or taking this season of kind of stillness or stability over hyper growth for the long-term picture? And it can be hard because
Yeah.
patience is not my virtue, but it's a
Mhm,
reality.
mhm. Yeah, samesies. I mean, and we even really kept a similar model in some ways. Uh, And still, I mean, and I was dropping one-to-one work slowly, which really was, about 60% of my revenue. And I thought, oh man, it's going to be like an easy transition. But our shift wasn't in the model, but it was in the
Mhm.
avatar, right? And so equally, it's rebuilding an entire
Yeah.
foundation. And so I definitely, I can totally just have empathy and towards that revenue hit and doing a lot of self coaching at that phase and season where it's like, okay, this is for the long term. This is for the long
Yeah.
term. be willing to test the waters. You're walking through the desert to get to the ocean, and that's going to
Oh,
take
I
some
love that
time for sure.
analogy. Yeah, that's such a good visual.
So you've mentioned the word financial transparency
Mhm.
several times. And before we dive into talking about that more deeply, I would love if you could just define what financial transparency means to you
Yeah,
specifically.
that's a great question. To me, financial transparency is having access to information that is typically gatekept, right? There's a growing movement online around pay transparency, but typically the conversation is limited to traditional employee employer relationships. Like, what is the average, marketing specialist role pay in a certain market? As entrepreneurs,
Yes,
it's a little bit different because we aren't necessarily limited or defined by set salary expectations, right? We get to create whatever reality we want to live in. But it doesn't mean that we're immune to this lack of access to information around like what is, the industry average for like what a coach charges, or like for a business of this size with this team this far into a journey, what are the typical profit margins, or what are people spending their money on, or how much did this big splashy launch actually make behind the scenes, and how does that feed the long 5-year 10-year goals, not just looking nice on paper for 90 days. There's so many unanswered questions, and I feel like for us, especially as women, money has always been societally a taboo topic, right? You don't ask people what they make, or brag about your money, or whatever it is. It's kind of like a hush hush type of thing. And I really feel like that harms us more than helps us, because I think, owe it to ourselves to be more transparent about what running businesses actually look like, and also what they look like for different people in different seasons and different industries. And it varies so much, but you don't know what you don't know. And I feel like that's why I feel so passionate about not only sharing my own journey of building a business in public, but also, inviting other women in my circle through the podcast to talk about, hey, here's like a real time strategy we've been trying in our business, and this is the result of that. Here are the real numbers around that. And it's not always pretty. And I think that's what is needed. Like, people need that honesty of, it's not always sunshine and rainbows. It's not always linear growth. But if you can have that data, you can make more informed decisions. And then we all collectively are more empowered when we are more financially literate.
totally. All the yes to everything you said. And also, as you're listening, if you're curious about the financial transparency conversations that Ellen has as we're talking, I'm going to drop some links to some of the episodes that I think speak directly, so you can listen to her episodes specifically and see what she's meaning and what that looks like in structure in her business. And I think you're going to really appreciate how open she is around those topics. And where this hits home for me, especially because the majority of our clients inside of the Best Damn Coach are what we
Mhm.
call emerging coaches, those that are pretty clear on who they're coaching, have a few clients, but really want to grow into that next level of having maybe a full roster, et cetera. And so, how often we have the conversation, the defeating conversation for many, around
Mhm.
unreasonable expectations of what really happens when you're like shot
Yeah.
out the gate as a coach. And we see, as to using your words, these splashy launches, and even somebody that's created a plethora of success inside their business. When you hear the words multi seven figure launches, I'm always like, let me see behind that curtain. Can you tell me, like, what did it take? What was your ad expense, to get there? What did you pay
Mhm.
your team for you to get there? What kind of partnerships were required? What did you pay your
Yep.
affiliates to get there? Because I'm always asking myself the question, yeah, seven figure launches are fantastic. And what's the sacrifice? If the net gain is 200K, I'm like, I'm sticking with my
Yeah.
business model every day. Because that's a tremendous amount of work and energy that's very time specific, that just doesn't go for my season of life or my style of,
Yes.
of person. And so I just really, really, appreciate
You
that
hit the
for
nail on the
sure.
head, Amanda. It's all about the context. And I think that's why our listeners are attracted to our case studies, because it isn't just the top line or even bottom line numbers. It's actually telling the story behind the numbers, right? Numbers don't lie, but there's always nuance to how they're interpreted. And so I think it's really important to share the context, because also, to your point, again, it's like, did someone make a multi seven figure launch And was their goal purely about maximizing profit? Because if it was, you're right, maybe that launch didn't actually make sense if they only kept 200,000, but they spent so much to have like a $5 million launch. But maybe their main objective was actually not about maximizing profit. Maybe they were serving a different long-term goal that, unless you heard the context, you wouldn't understand why they did what they did. And so I
So good.
think that's what's so key. And
Mhm.
that's why I'm so grateful for people like you who come on our show and are willing to share the full picture, not just like this one little pixel in a big painting, right?
Yeah, yeah, I totally concur. I'm curious, getting into your mind a little bit. I mean, sharing all the all the line
Yes, all of them.
items, essentially, um, all of them. I mean, I would make the assumption that perhaps that feels like there's stuff that comes up when you're about to put your whole business's P&L out for the
Yeah.
world to hear. And so, curious, how do you coach yourself through that, or what's the mindset that helps you continue to do that
I think
time
I'm
after
very
time?
encouraged by the positive feedback that I receive from people who share that. I mean, we've gotten so many different messages, things from, I've never, like, one of my favorite messages I ever got was actually from someone who's become a friend. I won't name them by name, but they said, in all of my decades of living, I've never felt comfortable even talking to my parents about what my business makes. Like, there's cultural norms that feel, agitated by any conversation around money. And because of the transparency through this show, I have felt encouraged to break down these barriers within even my own family unit. And it's broken like generational trauma around talking about money, which I mean, I can't even imagine the profound impact that has, and that never even leaves the walls of their homes, right? So I think that's what's so important, is that
Mhm.
financial transparency doesn't have to look the way that I practice it. You don't have to put your P&L out there for everybody to see if that feels like way too intense, right? But maybe it's as simple as, oh, now I feel comfortable talking about this with my partner, or maybe sharing a little bit more with my students to help them see the bigger picture of, again, realistic expectations. But yeah, there's definitely times when I'm like, oh, wow, this is really vulnerable, especially if the growth isn't what you hoped for or isn't linear. You always wonder, is someone going to hear this and think, oh, wow, they really backtracked, or like maybe they don't know what they're talking about if, this XYZ thing didn't happen. But for the most part, I feel like the feedback has been so positive, and that's what I self-talk myself through, is just reminding myself, like, okay, if I share this, who is that one person that's going to hear today and feel more empowered to make a smarter financial decision for themselves? And if that is all that does, it doesn't really matter what other people may have judgments around, because frankly, they're not part of my business. They don't have to live this life every day with me. So I'm the only one who has to feel at peace with the decisions that I make, right?
Yeah. Impact. Yeah, impact over everything. I love it. So one of the things that you share in your, episodes around financial transparency, and one of the things that really caught me was the paid partnerships or partnerships in general and sponsorship opportunities that really come up as your line items in the shift, obviously, of being a media company over a coaching company. And so I would love for you to just define, or share, because I think many of my listeners aren't really sure, especially being coaches, what this whole partnership sponsorship thing could even remotely
Mhm.
bring to the table. So if you could just give us an overview of how those relationships
Absolutely.
impact your
So this is a
business.
really big picture topic, and we could go into so many complexities. So I'll try to keep it as high level as possible. But in essence, when we partner with different brands, and I would say our strength as a media company creating business content, serving other business women, like, we operate in the B2B space, right? Our consumers are other business owners themselves. So I would say our strength or our specialty is in partnering with tech brands, and particularly software brands that our consumers, our podcast listeners, our newsletter readers are going to use or want to use those tools in their business. So we have a lot of partnerships with tech brands like Kajabi or Flowdesk or Honeybook, or just softwares that some of you may be familiar with or use in your business. But that doesn't mean we also don't extend outside of the tech space and look at what are all of the brands that could potentially support our ideal listener, our female founder. How can we support her in her wealth? How can we support her in her health? How can we support her in her family life, in her home life, in her travel, in, all of these different interests? And so essentially, we're always looking at what brands have services or products that could benefit our audience member. And then how can we get creative and basically play matchmaker and put this brand's offers in front of our audience in a way that is of value? And oftentimes we do that through content because content can be educational. So sometimes our partnerships are really simple and straightforward and minimal. So sometimes we work with a brand that's like, all we want to do is advertise on your podcast. We just want to, increase our brand awareness to this community. Cool. We can do things as simple and straightforward as that. But sometimes we do much more integrated partnerships where they're not only getting placements on one channel like our podcast, but maybe they're going, their content is showing up in all of our different content channels, on our socials, in our newsletter. In our podcast, but we're also doing activations. Like, for example, right now, as we're recording this, we're in the middle of a big grant campaign where we partnered with our longtime friends at Norby, and we're giving away two $1,000 cash grants to two members of our community who tell us what they want to spend this $1,000 on to grow their business. That is a much deeper integration, right? It's more out of the box than just, hey, let's talk about this product on our podcast. But that's what's so fun about partnerships is there's so many ways to partner with a brand, whether it's in person, whether it's through virtual programming, whether it's through content. And it's all about finding that aligned fit and serving both parties, both the brand's goals, but also helping to support whoever your end consumer is so that it's a win-win across the board.
I love that. So many golden nuggets in that conversation. I think it at least illuminates what you mean by partnerships based on your model. And so then I wear the hat of our listeners being coaches. And if that kind of
Yeah.
sparks like, oh, like I could see how this might come into the business I currently have. Or maybe you guys have a podcast listening, your socials,
Mhm.
you have a YouTube channel. I'm curious if you might offer maybe one or two tangible next best steps. So if they're like juices are flowing, they're thinking, how could I make this, bring this into my brand? What would you suggest like a great starting place
I
to
have
be
two
to take
thoughts.
action on that?
If you have absolutely no experience in creating content to promote a product or a service outside of your own, like your own offers, the best starting ground to train yourself in this skill set is affiliate marketing, because it's essentially a no risk way, honestly, on both sides for you to press, like to think about another brand or another business's goals outside of your own, and then utilize your content and access to your audience to help that brand achieve their goals. And it gives you uh, some sort of proof of concept or track record, right? Where you could then pitch other brands and be able to showcase the impact that you've had before. So that's the first thought. That said, though, I think the biggest thing is to really be a great listener of your community and be asking them, like, what are some of the things that you wish you had more support on, or you're spending a lot of time researching, do I buy this thing or that thing, use this thing or that thing? Like, what are some confusions around whatever it is that you help them with? Maybe let's say you're a health coach and your clients get really overwhelmed with grocery shopping. I don't know, like maybe they just get like overwhelmed when they step into a store with a million aisles and they're like, I don't even know what products I should buy. Could they potentially be helped by a service that delivers groceries straight to their door? Could they be helped by some sort of service that provides a more curated shopping list, like an app that does that? Sure, maybe. Okay, so now you have audience product fit, right? Now you have to go over to the brand side and see how you can start to build that relationship. How can you organically infuse that brand into your existing content? How can you start building that relationship? How can you bring a creative idea to the table and say, hey, what are your goals? Like, let's say we're talking to Instacart, right? Instacart, what are your goals for expansion in 2024? Like, what are some of the initiatives or campaigns you're working on? And how can how can I, as this health coach, amplify whatever it is that you're already doing and bring some sort of creative idea to the table? So that's kind of how I would think about it. The nuances are much more detailed and specific, but I hope that kind of at least gives
Sure, of
people
course.
an idea of how to approach.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I find totally, I love that you started with that affiliate piece too, and let it be something that you've used, have done, a program you've been a part of already that allows you to just authentically speak to the experience. I find, oh, that's actually something that I would love to just talk about because I do think that you've probably been in situations where either you've been asked by a brand to highlight
Yep.
them and it did not feel congruent for you, or just even in the beginning, trying to really showcase another brand and maybe muddling through or fumbling through how to articulate that. I mean, putting myself into the position of here I am putting this brand in front of listeners. It's one thing to authentically utilize the service. It's another to not to have it be a great fit, but not experience it myself. So how do you navigate yourself around that inner
That's a
integrity
great question.
and
And I think there's a
alignment for
lot
your
of layers to
audience?
that. The first thing I would say is I do believe that if you are a genuine customer of whatever it is that you're promoting, it will be much easier, obviously, for you to speak authentically to the experience.
Mhm.
That said, I don't think it's a necessity that every brand you partner with that you are a direct user of because you and your audience may not always be in the same situation with the same problems and necessary solutions, right? So you could potentially partner with a brand that has a great product or service that you know is going to be beneficial to your audience, but you yourself may not be in the exact situation as them where you need to use this product or service. So that's just a little distinction I would make. That said, though, your values absolutely have to align, I think 100% of the time. So even if you're like, in this stage of my business, it wouldn't make
Mhm.
sense for me to, or in this stage of my coaching, it wouldn't make sense for me to personally use this product, but this company's values and how they operate and how they treat their customers and the quality of what they're offering to my people, that I can stand behind and I can show up as a guide or as an educator to help my audience make an informed decision about whether or not this brand's products or services would be of benefit to them. That's something that's really important. And we have absolutely turned down offers before where we could have made a quick buck, but it wouldn't have made sense for us because either the values didn't align or the product audience fit was just so out of left field that we knew that if we brought it to our audience, it wouldn't have resulted in great outcomes for either side. Like our audience probably would have been confused about why we were sharing this in the first place. And on the flip side, the brand probably wouldn't have seen great performance metrics, which all in all leads to not a successful campaign that allows for renewal or continued relationship building. So you really have to think through all sides. Like, is this a win for me? Is this a win for my audience or my clients? And is this a win for the brand as well?
Yeah, I love that you brought up that right fit, Ellen, because something that came up for me and where I see this parallel is even in the beginning of coaching and you put your offer out to a prospective client, and if it's not like a heck yes for them, I can speak to myself. In the beginning, I found myself wanting to like bend and be flexible and maybe
Yeah.
concede on things to get that yes. And over time, though, the shift I've made in my business, which has served both my client and myself, and what I teach my coaches that I get the opportunity to work with is
Mhm.
your offer is really sacred. Treating your offer as a sacred space that you only are willing to let like the extremely right person into actually benefits your business in the long run so much. Because if we let people in that have some red flags, they're not going to get the results that
Mhm.
you are promising. They're really going to butt up against some of the, methodologies or the values. I love the word values that you use. And what you're going to find is they lose out, they don't get the results as much, and then you also don't get the results
Yeah.
from them. They don't go tell more people about you, right? Which disrupts the whole purpose of over delivering and making sure your clients are really getting the best fit. So if you're listening and you find that you're conceding, right, being willing to maybe let go of those
Mhm.
values to make a quick buck, rather in coaching or in sponsorships, is what might happen if you reframe that mindset of like, this offer, this sponsorship, this partnership is
Yes.
truly
And I
sacred, so
would
it
also
benefits both of
say
us.
that relates to, your relationship with the brand as well and being really clear on, like you said, what you are and aren't willing to do. For example, like some brands require approval of every single creative that gets put out in a sponsored campaign. We're open to that at times, but there's a limit, right? We're not going to be fed word for word, this is exactly what you need to say if it doesn't sound authentic to what we would actually say, because our audience can tell. So we have to be able to take a
Mhm.
stance and say we need creative control because we know our audience best. And we can work with you on like what are some absolute no-goes, like you don't want things like this included in the campaign. Okay, fine. We can work with you on that. We can decide like how many revisions are allowed, but being really clear about that up front and making it known, like my responsibility is to my community. It's them first. Like if it's going to come between, putting the brand first and putting our community first, we're going to choose our community. And so having that clear understanding of like where you're drawing your lines, I think is so important. And also, I think another thing I see a lot of people fall into when they first start getting into brand partnerships is that they give away so much for so little, right? Like even if you're not in this space, I'm sure at some point or another you've gotten some random DM or like email being like, "Hey, we'll pay you $100 if you want to create like 2 Instagram reels and
Oh,
review our gift and like do all these things." And look, like your value as a coach or as a creator, as a business owner extends so far beyond just access to your audience, like putting, this brand in front of your audience. It's also about the actual content creation, right? This is something I talk about a lot. You have to think of yourself as, look, if I'm creating some sort of content, I am taking the role of a writer, of a producer, of an editor, of a
mm,
photographer, of a videographer, of a makeup artist, if you're doing your own makeup, stylist, if you're outfitting yourself, props, all of these things that you have to think about to create something. This brand would have to go out and hire those roles to replicate you. So don't forget that it's not just about access to your audience, but it's also about the actual deliverable that you're creating itself that has value too. And even if you have a small audience, that has value. And so it's worth more than like $50 just because you have a tiny audience.
oh my gosh, I love that you kind of brought us home there. And I'm going to emphasize, even if you have a
Mhm.
small audience, which I know many of you listening are in that place, that you bring
Yeah.
value, and do not forget that at all. You shared so many nuggets. And again, everything that she shared is going to be listed in the show notes. But before I let you share, where they can connect with you more
Yes,
deeply,
please.
I'd love to wrap up with just two questions. And the first being, I'm curious, I know you've had the, I will say, opportunity, and you've been able to coach in your own life, and you know what it's like firsthand to impact people. But I'm curious, what has been maybe the biggest impact, or who has
Mm.
it been? What coach in your life has been the greatest impact for you, or what's been the learning from that
I
coach that's
feel I have
drastically
learned so
impacted your
much
journey?
from every single mentor that I've ever invested in. So it's kind of hard to pull out like one standout individual, but just for kind of a full answer, I'll start by like the first business mentor I ever invested in, and then the most recent one that I've paid money to kind of like show you both ends. The first person I ever invested money in was Rachel Peterson, back when I was a freelance social media manager trying to build, a social media marketing agency. And I think what I learned most about from Rachel was how you think about building a business that actually supports your life and being really clear, again, like some of the things that we talked about, right? Being really clear about what that actually looks like if it feels in alignment. I learned a lot of, I think, valuable life skills around my perception and approach of business from her. And then years later, now being in a totally different industry, totally different business model, someone that I worked with this past year is Jacqueline Johnson, founder of Create and Cultivate, one of the foremost events and media companies for women in business. And from Jacqueline, I learned so many tactical things, like so many very specific, nuanced things about, brand partnerships at
Mhm.
scale that you just wouldn't know if you haven't been in this industry for a decade working with some of the biggest brands in the world. And so I think that's the beauty of coaching, is that some coaches are going to help shape your perception and your critical thinking skills and your mindset, whereas others are going to give you the really
Mm.
tactical things that you can implement and see the changes from. But regardless, there's value in both experiences, right?
So good. I love that. That's your roundabout on the
Yes.
coaching. It's just so true. And we're going to be that for
100%.
people too, right? Just as we've received it, we're going to be that for people too. And
Oh,
lastly, you guys, Ellen is a newlywed, and I feel like I couldn't finish this episode
thank
without
you.
just highlighting that and congratulating you first off. What's the thing though that you're
Mm,
most excited about now that it's official? Is there
yeah.
anything kind of like, is it really different? Is it
I'll
not?
be
But I'm
really
curious
honest,
to
like,
see, what are you
my husband
excited
Dustin and I
about
have talked
now?
about this a lot. We don't necessarily feel like that much changed from pre-marriage to now being married. Now, granted, it's only been like 6 weeks or whatever, but but prior to being married, we were together for 6 years and we, like, had a house together. We really built our life together. So not like so much changed in the day to day of how we were living. But what I will say is, I'm very excited about just having a lifelong partner that you can build dreams with. And I think that's so cool. And Dustin and I are very different. Like he is like so opposite of me in every single way that you can probably think of. And so it's really refreshing though to be able to walk this journey with someone who isn't like me, though, who doesn't maybe necessarily have all the same ambitions or isn't necessarily like driven to want to build a business or want to be out there in the public. But I think it provides a fresh point of view. And I think the more you can surround yourself with people who offer differing points of view, the more your life will be enriched by that.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. And I love that for you. And I love that you can recognize that
Yeah.
already. And it doesn't take you being similar to grow together. And I've also found in the
Mhm.
journey that it's like you actually
Mm.
don't want both of you in growth phases simultaneously, because there's got to be someone that's like sitting back a little bit and then can
Yeah.
give you that space. And then it's almost like tag, you're it. And at least that's how I've seen like my marriage operate. And I remember there was one time very clearly, I was in a massive growth phase when I first started business, and Justin was still working for the PD. And I remember him so lovingly saying, but with real transparency,
Yeah.
is like, you can't grow without me. Like, I want to grow too. And it was almost just a catalyst for him
Yeah.
to see what was possible. I was the first one to kind of break the mold. And that
That's
invited
so
him to come
exciting.
along in
I
his
love
own
that.
way too. And so I'm glad you can recognize that. Yeah. So tell us where the amazing listeners can connect with you and learn more, listen to more of your financial transparency
Okay,
episodes
I've
and
got
case
2 things
studies.
for you.
So give us all the good
For
stuff.
the podcast, if you search Cubicle to CEO, wherever you're listening to this right now, our show, we ask successful founders and CEOs the business questions you can't Google. So if you're looking for stuff beyond the generic, like whatever you can Google on someone, this is the behind the business content that you're really looking for. We would love for you to add us to your weekly show rotation. For the income reports in specific, if you follow our show, you'll be notified, obviously, when we publish them every quarter. But if you want all of them, if you want to binge all of them in one place, we've been doing this since 2019. So you can go back and listen to like 4 years worth of income reports. Then we've compiled them all in one playlist on ellenyin.com, yin.com/ income report. And you could just go through the play bar there. And then the second thing is, if you are in that phase of self discovery, which I think all of us are eternally, especially as entrepreneurs, I would really encourage you to
For
take
sure.
a minute today and take our What's Your CEO Style quiz. So, this is a 10-question multiple choice quiz. Literally takes you like 60 seconds to breeze through, but it's going to reveal your unique leadership advantage and share with you, here are your 3 strengths, and then here are some potential blind spots that are preventing you from growing to that next level from a visibility and sales perspective. And it matches you with a curated list of podcast episodes and free resources that are actually going to help you implement some of those weak spots and improve upon your strengths. So ellenyin.com/quiz will take you to that quiz.
Awesome. You guys, everything will be
Thank you.
included in the show notes. Ellen, you've been a joy. I love your authenticity and your willingness to just help our listeners reframe and understand how to kind of sift through, the transparency or lack thereof that exists inside the industry, and just have permission to talk more about money and know that there's a community of
Thank
people
you so
out
much,
there that
Amanda.
want the same. So thank you so much for spending time with us today.